Arrive 30 minutes, 95th to downtown. Tri-State northbound, your delays are from the 83rd Street toll to the By Long Bridge, Plainfield Road to 47. Then from the Reagan toll right to the Grand Avenue curve. From the Reagan toll rates tied Farnsworth to Viola, 355 to Byers. It's traffic. I'm Jim Telemonte on AM 560 The Answer.
Chicago's Morning Answer continues next. Your official Chicagoland weather forecast from the 1 Hour Heating and Air Conditioning Weather Center and Steve Williams.
A Lakeshore flood watch, winter storm watch in effect tomorrow. Clouds and rain by this afternoon, high today 42. Showers of rain or snow tonight, low 34. Cloudy and breezy, snow and rain at times tomorrow, accumulating a coating to an inch, high 38. I'm Steve Williams on AM 560, The Answer.
37 at O'Hare. Next news at 8:30. Chicago's Morning Answer with Dan and Amy continues next on AM 560, The Answer.
This hourly segment is brought to you by Papa Nicholas Coffee. Papa Nicholas Coffee, a family tradition since 1897.
This is Chicago's Morning Answer with Dan Proft and Amy Jacobson on AM 560. The Answer.
They got the beat, the campus beat, the campus beat. Yeah, the campus beat.
Yeah, and Campus Beat takes us to Shawnee State University, where Professor Nicholas Merriweather found out where his free speech rights begin and end in a suit against Merriweather. U.S. District Court Judge Susan DeLotte said that Professor Merriweather's practice of referring to students as Miss or Mr. is not constitutionally protected. The manner in which he addressed a transgender student by that student's biological sex was not protected speech, and so it was okay for him to be subject to sanction. Yeah. You will be made to comply. Resistance against the Borg is futile. Now, I'm trying to find words from this new glossary of terms that was authored by Lee Jussim from Rutgers University to properly describe this case. It's somewhere in the in between athletic gynocide, which is the elimination from sports competitions of people identified as birth by doctors or other adults as female because they cannot successfully compete with people identified as birth by doctors or other adults as male, but who identify as females. Follow that?
Yeah.
This is, by the way, the best glossary of terms since Ambrose Bierce's Devil's Dictionary. It's very, very good. So somewhere between athletic gynocide and emotional imperialism, which is defined as the strange belief that your feelings should dictate someone else's behavior. Yeah. Maybe also include a little bit of istophobia, fear of being called an ist, racist, sexist, fascist, etc., usually followed by self-censorship. That's probably where it's going for Professor Merriweather. For more on this topic, we're pleased to be joined by the aforesaid Lee Jussim, who is a professor of social psychology at Rutgers University. Professor Jussim, thanks for joining us. Appreciate it.
Thanks for having me here.
And so this seems to be the area that is really spiking in terms of litigation and confrontation on college campuses, everything under the rubric of trans.
Yes. There are a number of things that are flashpoints for threats to both speech and academic freedom and free inquiry. I actually have a more serious essay simply titled "The Threat to Academic Freedom from Academics." But yes, you're right. It's probably worst, most severe for trans-related issues.
Well, yeah, your piece about the threat to academic freedom, you sort of echo sentiment that's found in Douglas Murray's book on the madness of crowds, and you talk about the mob psychology of academics.
Yeah, and that I don't know whether I'm just noticing it more the last few years, or it seems to have increased and gotten worse. I think it's gotten worse. I don't remember it ever being the way it is. I mean, the go-to move when people are offended by an idea now is to denounce and attempt to punish. And I just never, I don't remember, I've been a professor since 1987. I just don't remember a cultural, intellectual atmosphere like this in any prior version of my academic life.
Well, to your point, I mean, and just to stick on trans as an example, this at Notre Dame, University of Notre Dame, which at one point apparently was a Catholic university. This Affirming Care for Gender Diverse Youth, a panel discussion hosted at University of Notre Dame in violation of Notre Dame's own sort of academic protocols to have panels with people who have differences of opinion on a particular topic. Not here. All four of the speakers on this panel were affiliated in some way with Indiana University. All were entirely in agreement that boys and girls can choose their gender, that gender is a social construct, and all were in agreement that it is okay, if not absolutely a moral imperative, to intervene medically, surgically, with respect to preteen kids so that they are allowed to pursue the gender that they say they identify as.
Yeah, so most, at least as of a few years ago, most social scientists would distinguish between biological sex and gender, which was psychological. And as a psychological construct, you can imagine that, whether you're male or female or identify as anything else, there's degrees, right? You can be more macho, more feminine, less macho, less feminine, whatever it might be. So as a psychological construct, the non-binary thing holds. It completely holds, I think. But then there's the this biological sex and this it's one thing to make an argument that even biological sex is not binary, and there are rare biological exceptions, and you could make that case. And that would be normal academic practice. They might be right, they might be wrong, it might be kind of a little bit right, but wildly overstated. And academia, if it was functioning well, would then navigate that and negotiate that and attempt to reach some resolution as to what's really going on. And maybe there'd never be a resolution, and it would be controversial. But the way it's unfolded is in this shut-down, censorious outrage mob sort of mode where only one set of views are safe to present. And that is very scary.
Yeah, and tell us in your article you wrote about Laura Tanner, a graduate student in feminist studies. What happened to her?
Yeah. Well, so I only know this from the news reports. I've never interviewed her or anything like that. As far as I know, she's still, the last I knew, she's okay. She's still in the program, but she's been subject to protests designed to prevent her from teaching and to kick her out of the university. And I mean, that pattern is not unusual. There was an editorial by two biologists in the Wall Street Journal, I guess about a week ago, called "The Dangerous Denial of Sex." And on Twitter, and Twitter in some ways is really dumb and superficial, but in some ways it's where a lot of the academic sort of intellectual ideas and activism takes place, is a move, this growing move, which I hope doesn't go anywhere, to essentially blacklist one of the authors, who's a young researcher, I think he's a postdoc, from getting a job. And this is just crazy. It's just the crazy stuff.
So I talked to Spencer Clavin, who is assistant editor for Claremont Review of Books, last week. We were talking about Douglas Murray's book and his review of it, but also this larger dynamic that you're speaking of happening on college campuses, but certainly not limited to college campuses. And listen to what he had to say about why trans has moved so quickly through the culture. He argues that the reason it's moving so quickly is precisely because it's not seriously defended.
Two competing ideas. One, that gender is a social construct. It's a figment of our imagination. There's no such thing as male and female. But two, a person born biologically male can have some spiritual essential conviction that he's actually something called a woman, and that's a real thing, and that's what he is. So those are two ideas you actually can't hold in your mind at the same time. They contradict one another.
So what about that? The fact that they're contradictory if you were forced to defend them intellectually, and so the way that you get around that when you're largely a political activist masquerading as an academic or masquerading in so many other ways in our culture, the way you get around them is to not tackle them seriously, is to shut people up who would offer scholarship or who would offer a dissenting view. That helps explain why you said this dynamic has changed between people who used to at least concede there's such a thing as biological sex, and then there's gender identity, and those lines have been erased.
Yeah, I mean, to me, so yeah, I don't. My scientific expertise is not on the transgender issues or hormone therapy or any of that. So I'm a little bit reluctant to speak to the merits of the issue. What really kind of is central to my expertise at this point is this sort of ongoing culture, this rising culture of blacklisting and denunciation, and this goes way beyond trans stuff. So a couple of weeks ago, I attended a conference at the sponsored by the National Association of Scholars. They are correctly, I think, described by Wikipedia as formally nonpartisan, but de facto conservative. So they've become this sort of haven for the few conservatives remaining in academia. And several of this was a conference on fixing science. So science has all sorts of issues. I mean, we've gotten to the moon, the cell phones are amazing, but especially academic science has major, major problems. There's a very famous paper titled "Why Most Published Research Findings Are False." So this conference was around addressing those issues, but because several presenters were challenging some of the conventional wisdom or the consensus about climate science, the conference was denounced by a slew of academics who put pressure on people not to attend. And in fact, two younger scholars who are trying to get career liftoff didn't want to be stigmatized and dropped out. And this was because of denunciations about climate science.
Well, right. So I mean, the dynamic that we were talking about in the area of trans, it extends to every other sector. I mean, it's just that is an example. Climate science is another example too, where I'm not interested in a discussion about why the models were wrong. I'm not interested in what Patrick Moore has to say, or Byron Lumberg, or anybody who has any data-driven argument that provides additional context to the discussion. I'm not interested in it. You're either for this one-size-fits-all policy agenda, or you're cast out as a non-believer.
Right, that's right. And my expertise is not climate science either. So I'm not making any statement about what's true or not. And in fact, the widespread consensus may be that they may be completely right. But the way you negotiate that, the way you figure that out, is by permitting alternative views into the sort of intellectual culture, and then you vet those views. That is how science progresses. It doesn't progress with this sort of Maoist cultural revolution style of doing things.
Well, so what is afoot in higher ed other than Jonathan Haidt's Heterodox Academy, and then what the National Association of Scholars tries to do? Is there any movement afoot to really push back against the Maoist culture, or is it just so, as you say, or is it just so overwhelming that it's every man for himself, and people are just trying to keep out of the view of the barbarians?
Yeah. Well, that is the $100 million question for anyone who actually cares about what you might be called free inquiry and academic freedom. And I'm not going to pretend to have an answer. However, there are, it goes beyond Heterodox Academy. The National Association of Scholars, as far as I can tell, were mostly these older men, and if they're going to have a viable presence, they need to start bringing younger scholars in order to, carry the torch into the future. And there is FIRE, the Foundation for Individual Rights in Education, and they do great work, but it's mainly on the legal front. And a lot of the things that I'm talking about, there's nothing illegal. So free speech absolutely protects your right to denounce me. So the core problem isn't the lack of legal protections, although, I heard the story that you described at the beginning, and so there may be issues there as well. But there's a new organization called this Free Speech Union. It just got organized. And the principle is kind of like NATO. That is, an attack on one will be deemed an attack on all. Yeah. Now, it just launched. I am a member of it and stuff, and I have no idea whether it's going to be effective or not. And that's because none of us really have the answer to this, but we're trying.
All right. Well, we'll continue to watch for blossoms penetrating up through the sidewalk there. Lee Jussim, professor of social psychology at Rutgers University, and do check out, for a little bit of comic relief on an otherwise heavy topic, his Orwell lexicon, new glossary of terms, because it is quite funny. And the reason it's funny is because it's so based in truth. Lee, thanks for joining us. Appreciate it.
Okay. Thank you so much.
And he joined us on our turnkey.pro answer line.
It's news, opinion, insight. This is Chicago's Morning Answer on AM 560. The Answer.
A business needs to be built on a great foundation, one with the framework of integrity and tradition. Chapel Design Build delivers just that, providing design build and general contracting services using Butler Steel Building Systems. Their projects dot the landscape from O'Hare to DeKalb. You see their work in office and warehouse additions, recreational facilities, large-scale distribution centers, and manufacturing plants all over northern Illinois. Partnering with Butler Steel Buildings, Chapel Design Build has developed an extensive subcontractor base and valuable market knowledge to get your quality-built project completed on time and on budget, ensuring your project is a success for your business and one that you will be proud of for years to come. The goal is to build lasting relationships with their clients using buildings that last from Butler. Get started on your next building project built with Butler Steel. Visit chapeldb.com. That's Chapel D as in design, B as in build.com.